Hey, welcome, church family. Uh, I hope these videos from week to week are helpful in your personal uh, study through Romans and in the times when you get together as a family or as a small group and have discussions. And whether you're doing that regularly and formally or not, uh, all of us have opportunities throughout the week when we're interacting with people, believers or unbelievers, uh, to talk with them about what's on our mind and what's in our heart. And a whole bunch of that is uh, what God's doing us through Romans. So I hope you're in the Word. I hope you're looking for opportunities to share that with others and just make it part of your conversation. So this week, March 19th, I get the privilege to preach through the last few verses of Romans 9, verses 30 to 33, and then all of chapter 10, verses 1 through 21. There is a misprint in our booklets. This week's passage does not go into chapter 11. We'll get that on the 26th of March. But regardless of that, I hope that you're spending some time looking at Romans chapter 9 and Romans chapter 10 this week. So Paul kind of steps back in these three chapters, 9, 10, and 11, and kind of inserts a big section of material here where he's trying to explain what God is up to, in particular with his people, the Israelites. And Romans chapter 8 ended with nothing can separate us from God's love, and this great high point. And then maybe for Jewish believers, they're looking around and they're saying, well, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Jesus came to his people. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus ministered in Israel among Jewish people. Why aren't the Jews responding to Jesus? If God has made himself known to them, what's up there? And so chapter 9, in a very general way, can be maybe described as what God has done with Israel in the past and his sovereign plans for the nation of Israel and how the Israelites in general have responded to that. Chapter 10, end of chapter 9 and chapter 10, can maybe be looked at from the kind of the perspective of what's up with God and Israel in this time, at the present time. And Israel's still not responding to God, and is God letting them down on his promises? And then chapter 11 certainly gets towards, so what's God's future plans for Israel? So that's one way to look at it. Throughout this, there's text for all of us. It's not just Paul talking to the Israelites, but that's kind of one way to look at it. Chapter 9, what he's done in the past. 10, what he's currently doing with the Jewish people. And chapter 11, what he's doing in the future. In your study and in your conversations, I think there's two bedrock truths not to miss here. One is chapter 9, verse 6 of Romans, that says, "It is not as though God's word had failed." God's word can be trusted. It has not failed. And then also 11:29 says, "For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable." In the NIV, it uses the word irrevocable. And so some bedrock ideas when looking at these passages is that God can be trusted. His word is true. He's faithful to all his promises. They've not all been fulfilled yet, but he is faithful, and he's been faithful. And so Romans 9, verses 30 to 33, if there's something there to kind of look at or talk about in your discussion, it's this stumbling stone and this cornerstone. And how can Jesus be the one that is the way to salvation, But for a lot of people, Jesus is in the way. He's their obstacle. He's their stumbling stone. That might be something there to look at. Chapter 10, those rich verses, verses 9, 10, and 11, and 12, I guess all the way through 13, 9 through 13, those rich verses of what it means to give your life to Christ, to confess and to believe, make confession that Jesus is Lord. Those are all some great things to talk about, what that means, that he's the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So right there in the middle of chapter 10, that'd be a great place to sit and think over and meditate and study on. And then finally, I'll just give you this one. Chapter 10, verse 15. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. Just so sweet, so precious that God draws our attention and holds up as beautiful, just divinely beautiful, those who are sharing the good news, taking the good news to those that don't know it. It's a good news that has eternal consequences. It's a news of good tidings. It's the whole theme of our study. It's on the front covers of our booklets. Romans is God's good news. And here near the end of chapter 10, Paul just reminds us from this quote in the Old Testament of God's, it's a beautiful thing to take the good news to others. So certainly there are a lot to thank God for, those who have shared the good news with you in the past, and then a little convicting. Who is it around you that's hearing from you the good news? And that certainly leads into prayer, and it should lead into action and accountability before God and with one another in your groups. Are you busy sharing, taking the good news, the news of God's salvation to all people? So I hope this helps a little bit in your study. Look forward to you being here on Sunday morning. And as always, through your study, if you're coming up with questions, things you're not quite sure of, please email one of the elders, talk about it as your groups, get out some commentaries and study it. But it takes hard work to dig into God's Word, but it's truth, and it's truth that we can trust in and live by. God bless you all.